On a warm December night in Glendale, California, a young pizza delivery driver stepped out to do what he had done many times before. His name was John Harrian. He was only 21 years old. To him, this was not a dangerous job. It was just work, a part-time shift, a simple way to earn money while studying and building a future. That night, the city seemed ordinary. Streets were quiet. Motel signs glowed in the darkness. Cars passed by without anyone noticing the danger that was already waiting. John had no reason to be afraid. When an order came in from a local motel, he picked up the pizza, got into his vehicle, and drove toward the address. For him, it was just another delivery, another customer, another quick stop before returning to the restaurant. But inside that motel room, two people were waiting. They were not hungry customers. They were Mitchell Sims and Ruby Padet. And by the time John walked through that door, his life had already entered its final and most terrifying chapter. At first, the situation may have seemed strange, but not immediately deadly. A motel room, a woman opening the door, a man nearby. Maybe John felt confused. Maybe he thought it was some kind of joke. But within moments, the mood changed. The friendly delivery turned into a trap. He was confronted, threatened, tied up and terrorized by two strangers who had no personal connection to him. John did not know them. He had not harmed them. He had simply come to deliver food. But to Mitchell Sims, John represented something else. He represented the company that Sims believed had betrayed him. This was not a robbery that began with hunger or need. It was something colder, something more personal, something born from humiliation, rage, and revenge. As John struggled to understand what was happening, Sims and Ruby controlled the room. They had already crossed a line that most people never even approach. They were not just criminals anymore, they were partners in violence. And the most frightening part was this: they were calm enough to continue. This single motel room in Glendale was not the beginning of their story. It was the continuation of a dark path that had started thousands of miles away, inside another pizza restaurant, with one angry manager, one disappointing paycheck, and a wounded ego that grew into something deadly. To understand why John Harrian became a victim that night, we have to go back 1 year earlier, back to South Carolina, back to a pizzeria where Mitchell Sims believed he was king.
A year before the Glendale motel horror, Mitchell Sims was working in West Columbia, South Carolina. He was the manager of a popular pizza chain, and from the outside, his life appeared stable. He had a wife, he had children, he had authority at work. He had young employees who answered to him. He had the type of position that made him feel important, and Mitchell Sims liked feeling important. Inside the restaurant, he carried himself like someone who believed the place belonged to him. He had power over the schedule, the staff, the atmosphere, and perhaps even the mood of the entire store. To some employees, he may have seemed confident. To others, arrogant. But beneath that confidence was something unstable. Sims wanted respect, money, attention, and control. And when he felt those things were taken away from him, his anger did not fade. It grew. During the holiday season, employees expected annual bonus checks. There was excitement in the air. For most workers, any extra money before Christmas would be welcome. But for Sims, the bonus meant more than money. It was proof of his value. He expected a large check. He believed he deserved it. In his mind, he had earned recognition. But when the amount came in, it was far less than he expected. That moment changed everything. To someone else, it may have been a disappointment. To Mitchell Sims, it was an insult. He exploded. The restaurant, once full of festive energy, became tense. Sims took the check as a personal attack. He believed the company had disrespected him. He believed his boss had failed to see his worth, so he decided to prove his importance. His plan was simple but foolish. He would convince the employees under him to walk out. If the staff left with him, the store would collapse. Corporate would panic. His boss would realize Sims was the real power behind the operation. In Mitchell's mind, he would become the hero. He called for the others to follow him, but they did not. The employees stayed. They needed their jobs. They were not willing to gamble their income on one man's anger. Only Sims and his girlfriend walked out. And just like that, his plan failed. Even worse, his boss did not beg him to return. Instead, Sims had effectively quit. He had removed himself from the job he believed made him powerful. That humiliation planted something poisonous inside him. He did not simply move on. He did not accept responsibility. He did not see the mistake as his own. Instead, he blamed the company. In his mind, they owed him. And from that belief, revenge began to take shape. Soon, Sims left behind his family, his old life, and the first version of himself. He moved toward Charleston, to a place called Hanahan. There he would meet someone who did not calm the rage inside him. She fed it. Her name was Ruby Padet. In Hanahan, South Carolina, Mitchell Sims found a new life, but not a better one. He found another job with the same pizza chain, this time as a delivery driver. It looked like a step down from manager to driver, and maybe that made the humiliation even worse. He had once felt like the man in charge. Now he was back on the road, taking orders, wearing the shirt of the company he hated. But in Hanahan, Sims also met Ruby Padet. Ruby was young, troubled, intense, and drawn to danger. She had her own painful history. She had grown up around violence, fear, and instability. In her world, chaos did not feel unusual. It felt familiar. That familiarity made Mitchell Sims attractive to her. He was angry. He was reckless. He carried darkness with him. And instead of running from it, Ruby moved closer. Together, they became more than a couple. They became an echo chamber. His rage met her brokenness. Her willingness met his violence. Their relationship was not healing either of them. It was pushing both of them closer to disaster. They drank. They used drugs. They talked about money. They talked about being wronged. And somewhere in those conversations, Sims' hatred of the pizza chain returned. This was no longer just anger over a paycheck. It had become a mission. Mitchell believed the company had taken something from him. His pride, his role, his sense of control. And in his twisted thinking, the employees who worked there became targets. The people behind the counters were not enemies. They were ordinary workers trying to earn money. But Sims did not see them that way. He saw the uniform, the store, the brand. He saw revenge. One night, just after 1 a.m, 2 employees were closing the Hanahan pizzeria. Their names were Gary Melky and Christopher Czar. Both were connected to the Charleston Naval Hospital and worked at the restaurant for extra money. Their shift was nearly over. The store was quiet. The doors were closed. It should have been the safest part of the night. Then Mitchell Sims entered. He was not there to work. He was armed. The 2 men must have been shocked. This was someone they knew, a co-worker, a man who had stood beside them in the same store. But suddenly he was ordering them to the ground, threatening them, and forcing them into terror. He took money from the safe, but money was not enough. If this had only been robbery, he could have left. He could have run. But Sims wanted no witnesses. More than that, he seemed to want power over life and death. The 2 employees begged. They were helpless. Then Sims opened fire. Christopher Czar died at the scene. Gary Melky was shot multiple times and left for dead. Sims believed both men were gone. He was wrong, and that mistake would change everything.
Gary Melky should not have been able to move. He had been shot repeatedly. He was bleeding badly. He had every reason to collapse and never rise again. But somehow, through pain, shock, and fear, Gary found the strength to survive long enough to act. After Mitchell Sims fled the pizzeria, Gary crawled. Imagine that moment. The store was silent except for the aftermath of violence. His co-worker was gone. The man who shot him had disappeared. Gary was wounded, disoriented, and alone. But he knew one thing: he had to get help. He managed to reach his car. Somehow he got inside. Somehow, he turned the key. Then, in a condition that seemed almost impossible, he drove toward the police station. It was only about a quarter of a mile away. But for Gary, that short distance must have felt endless. At around 2 in the morning, he stumbled into the police station covered in blood. Officers were stunned. At first, they did not fully understand what had happened. They saw a young man badly injured, barely holding on, trying to speak. Then he told them he had been shot. And more importantly, he identified the shooter, Mitchell Sims. That name gave police a direction. It gave them urgency. It told them this was not a faceless crime. The killer was someone known to the victims. Paramedics rushed to help Gary. Officers went to the pizzeria and found the horrifying scene Sims had left behind. Christopher Czar was already dead. Gary had survived long enough to name his attacker, but his injuries were catastrophic. At the hospital, doctors fought to keep him alive. His parents were called in the early morning hours. Every parent fears that kind of phone call. The kind that comes before sunrise, the kind that begins with confusion and ends with devastation. At first, they hoped. They wanted to believe Gary could recover, but the truth became impossible to avoid. His wounds were too severe. Doctors explained that even if he lived, he would never return as the son they knew. His family faced an unbearable decision. Eventually, Gary was taken off life support. Mitchell Sims had now left 2 families destroyed. Police moved quickly. They gathered information from the restaurant and found Sims's address. Officers went to a trailer park, believing they had located his home. But there was hesitation. The area was dark. The numbering was confusing. They were not completely sure which trailer was his. They did not force entry. They left. And that decision gave Sims the chance he needed. He had expected both victims to die. He had not expected Gary to identify him. Now he had to run. And Ruby Padet ran with him. Their destination was far away.
After the Hanahan murders, Mitchell Sims was no longer just an angry former manager. He was a wanted killer. But instead of surrendering, he ran across the country with Ruby Padet. To many people, this would be the moment when fear took over. A normal person might panic, confess, or try to escape alone. Ruby did not leave him. She stayed. That decision revealed something chilling about their bond. Ruby knew what Mitchell had done. She understood the danger. She knew people had died. But rather than stepping away from the violence, she moved deeper into it. Together, they became fugitives. As they traveled west, police began looking into Mitchell's past. What they found was disturbing. Sims had a long history of emotional damage, instability, manipulation, and revenge. His childhood had been filled with abuse. His adult life had shown patterns of deceit and aggression. Years earlier, while in the army, he had been involved in a bizarre plan connected to an affair. He had wanted another woman's husband out of the way, and his scheme involved having someone shoot him so he could blame the husband. But the plan collapsed. The truth came out. Sims was convicted and sent to military prison. He was later dishonorably discharged. This history mattered because it showed a pattern. When Mitchell Sims felt rejected, challenged, or humiliated, he did not simply walk away. He plotted. He blamed others. He tried to turn the world into a stage for revenge. Ruby's background was also troubled. She had grown up around violence. She had seen abuse inside her own home. As she got older, she entered abusive relationships, repeating the same pattern of pain she had known as a child. So when she met Mitchell, she did not see danger the way others might. She saw someone familiar, someone damaged, someone exciting. But when 2 damaged people feed each other's worst instincts, the result can become deadly. 6 days after the Hanahan murders, the couple reached the West Coast. Glendale, California should have been just another city. But for John Harrian, Don Russell, and Nick Lewis, it became the place where Mitchell and Ruby's violence arrived again. Before they attacked the Glendale pizzeria, They needed access. They needed a vehicle. They needed a way inside the system. So they called for a pizza delivery. And John Harrian answered. He had no idea that the order was not really about pizza. It was bait. He walked into a motel room, believing he was doing his job. Instead, he walked into the hands of two killers who had already decided that another innocent worker could be sacrificed for their revenge.
The motel room in Glendale became a chamber of fear. John Harrian had been lured there by an order. Once inside, he was overpowered by Mitchell Sims and Ruby Padet. He was tied up. He was threatened. He was forced into a nightmare that made no sense. For John, the terror must have been overwhelming. He did not know these people. He did not know about the paycheck in South Carolina. He did not know about the failed walkout, the rage, the Hanahan murders, or the cross-country escape. He only knew that he was trapped. Mitchell Sims saw him not as a person, but as a problem. John had seen their faces. He could identify them. And in Sims' mind, that was enough reason to kill. That is one of the most frightening things about this case. John did not die because of something he did. He died because he was useful to them for a moment and dangerous to them afterward. After killing John, Sims and Ruby tried to clean the room. They wiped surfaces, attempting to erase their presence. They understood evidence. They understood that fingerprints could connect them to the crime. But criminals often believe they are more careful than they truly are. They stole John's pickup truck and headed to the pizzeria where he worked. They were not finished. The motel room was only the first stage of their Glendale plan. At the restaurant, assistant manager Don Russell and driver Nick Lewis were working alone. It was the kind of late shift where the building feels too quiet. The phones ring less. The lights seem harsher. The outside world feels distant. Then Sims and Ruby arrived. Sims was wearing a pizza store shirt, making him appear connected to the business. That detail mattered. It helped him move within the setting with less suspicion. Inside, he forced Don and Nick into the back. Ruby helped collect money. The robbery unfolded quickly, but the situation became more complicated when an unexpected customer entered. The customer was actually an off-duty employee named Bob Hanson. He sensed something was wrong, but he did not fully understand what he had walked into. The employees inside had to act normal. One wrong reaction could have turned Bob into another hostage. Sims even behaved politely, playing a role, pretending everything was ordinary. But Bob noticed enough. Something felt off. After leaving, he contacted others, and soon police were alerted. Inside the pizzeria, Sims and Ruby forced Don and Nick into the walk-in freezer. They tied them in a horrifying way, leaving them standing on their toes to stay alive. Then the killers walked away. But this time, help was already moving toward the store.
Don Russell and Nick Lewis were left inside the cold darkness of the walk-in freezer. Their bodies were bound. Their lives depended on balance, strength, and the ability to keep standing on their toes. If they slipped, if their legs gave out, if panic overwhelmed them, they could die. The cold made everything worse. Minutes stretched longer. Breathing became fear. Every movement carried danger. They did not know whether anyone had noticed something wrong. They did not know if the killers would return. They did not know if John Harrian was safe. But outside the store, the off-duty employee's suspicion had triggered action. Police arrived at the pizzeria. At first, the building appeared closed. The lights were out, the door was shut. When officers entered, they searched the store but found no one. They called out, no answer. Then they checked the last place anyone would want to find a person, the refrigerator. Inside, they discovered Don and Nick hanging in the freezing air. At first, officers feared they were dead, but they were alive. The rescue came just in time. Once freed, the men told police what had happened. A man and a woman had robbed the store. The man had worn a pizza shirt. And John Harrian, the delivery driver, had not returned from his motel delivery. That detail shifted the investigation immediately. Police rushed to the motel. They entered the room, uncertain of what they would find, but fearing the worst. In the bathroom, they found John. He was dead. For investigators, even experienced ones, scenes like that leave a mark. It was not just death, it was cruelty. It was the realization that an innocent young man had been used, tortured, and discarded by people who saw him only as an obstacle. John's mother was later told the news. There are moments in life that split time in two, before and after. For her, this was one of them. One sentence changed everything. Her son was dead. Her son had been murdered. And the way he died made the grief even harder to bear. Investigators searched the motel room carefully. At first, it seemed the killers had wiped everything down. Walls, furniture, surfaces, all cleaned in an attempt to destroy evidence. But they missed something: a spare roll of toilet paper. They also examined the yellow pages, especially where someone might have searched for pizza listings. In those small, ordinary objects, investigators found what they needed: fingerprints. Mitchell Sims had tried to disappear, but his own hands had left the truth behind. The fingerprint evidence connected Mitchell Sims to the Glendale motel room. Soon, California investigators learned that South Carolina police were already searching for him in connection with the murders of Gary Melky and Christopher Czar. The pattern was now clear. This was not one robbery. This was a traveling campaign of violence against employees connected to the same pizza chain. Sims and Ruby had already fled again. After leaving Glendale, they drove more than 200 miles to Las Vegas, Nevada. They checked into a motel under false names, presenting themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Jeff Richards. They paid for a month's rent in cash. For a short time, they lived like people who believed they had escaped. They had money. They had a stolen truck. They had distance from the crime scenes. In Las Vegas, a city built on noise, strangers, lights, and temporary identities, they may have thought they could disappear. They drank, they used drugs, they gambled, they spent money taken from fear and death. But outside their motel room, the net was tightening. Police issued nationwide alerts. They were looking for Mitchell Sims, Ruby Padet, and the pickup truck stolen from John Harrian. 12 days after John's murder, security personnel at a Las Vegas casino noticed a truck in a parking lot that seemed abandoned. Police checked the vehicle and discovered it was John's stolen pickup. Inside were pieces of his work life, including his shirt and name tag. The truck was found, but Sims and Ruby were gone. At first, the trail seemed cold. Las Vegas is not an easy place to search. People come and go constantly. Motels fill with strangers. Cash changes hands. False names are easy to use. So police turned to the public. They released information. Wanted posters went up. The faces of Mitchell Sims and Ruby Padet began appearing around town and on the news. Then, a man who had sold drugs to the couple saw their pictures. He recognized them. The reward caught attention too. A large amount of money for information leading to their capture. The tipster contacted police and gave them exactly what they needed: the motel location and the room where the couple was staying. After days of violence, death, and escape, the killers were finally cornered. Police moved in. They had to assume Sims and Ruby were armed. They had to prepare for the possibility that the couple would shoot their way out. Mitchell Sims had already killed multiple people. No one knew what he would do when trapped. On Christmas Day, 1985, police in Las Vegas approached the motel room where Mitchell Sims and Ruby Padet were hiding. The timing was almost unreal. Across the country, families were gathering, opening gifts, eating meals, and trying to feel peace. But inside that motel, two fugitives were reaching the end of a violent run that had left families destroyed in South Carolina and California. Officers opened the door. They ordered Sims and Ruby to show their hands and get down. Given everything Sims had done, police expected danger. They expected resistance. They expected the possibility of gunfire. But Mitchell Sims surrendered. For investigators, that was surprising. A man who had shown such cruelty, who had left victims begging and dying, gave up without a dramatic fight. Sims and Ruby were arrested and taken into custody. Then came the interviews. Glendale detective John Perkins questioned Sims. At first, Sims did not seem eager to talk, but then he said something chilling. He admitted he had killed John Harrian. Not with deep remorse, not with a full emotional collapse. He explained it as if it had been necessary. John could identify him, so in Sims's mind, John had to die. But then he went even further. He did not simply say he had to do it. He said he decided to do it. That difference matters. It revealed choice. It revealed control. It revealed that John's death was not panic, not accident, not confusion. It was a decision made by a man who had already accepted murder as a tool. Ruby's interview was different. She tried to reduce her role. She claimed she did not know everything. She pushed blame towards Sims. She denied parts of the violence and tried to present herself as less involved. But investigators did not believe her. The evidence and witness accounts suggested she had been an active participant. She had traveled with Sims after the South Carolina murders. She had helped during the Glendale crimes. She had been present, involved, and willing enough to continue. The partnership began to break under pressure. When people commit crimes together, loyalty often seems strong while they are free. But inside interview rooms, with prison ahead and evidence closing in, that loyalty can disappear quickly. Ruby began distancing herself from Mitchell. Sims and Ruby eventually waived extradition and were returned to California to face charges. At court, observers noticed something unsettling. They smiled. Behind those smiles were the deaths of John Harrian, Gary Melky, and Christopher Zarr, and the near deaths of Don Russell and Nick Lewis. The case moved toward trial, and prosecutors wanted the harshest punishment available. Ruby Padet was tried first. Her defense tried to place the weight of the crimes on Mitchell Sims. She claimed fear. She claimed pressure. She claimed she had been under his control. But the prosecution argued that Ruby was not merely a frightened passenger. She had taken part. She had helped. She had stayed through one violent act after another. Witnesses from the Glendale pizzeria described a woman who was involved in the robbery and the terror that followed. The jury found Ruby guilty of murder and robbery. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For Mitchell Sims, the evidence was overwhelming. He had been identified by surviving victims. Fingerprints connected him to the motel room. He was linked to the stolen truck, the weapons, and the pattern of crimes across states. In September 1987, he was sentenced to death in California for the murder of John Harrian and the related crimes. A year later, he was returned to South Carolina to stand trial for the murders of Gary Melky and Christopher Zarr. There, too, he was convicted. There, too, he received a death sentence. For the families, the verdicts brought some relief, but not peace, because justice in death penalty cases can move slowly. Appeals stretch for years. Decades can pass. Families who thought a sentence would bring final closure often find themselves trapped in a second kind of punishment. Waiting. The pain does not end when court closes. John's family still had to live with the memory of a young man who went to work and never came home. Gary's family had to remember a son who fought with impossible strength to identify his killer before dying. Christopher's loved ones had to live with the knowledge that he was killed during an ordinary shift in an ordinary restaurant by someone who should never have been there with a gun. Don Russell and Nick Lewis survived. But survival does not erase terror. They were left in a freezer, balanced between life and death, because two people decided their lives meant nothing. The Mitchell Sims and Ruby Padet case is terrifying not only because of the murders, but because of the partnership. Alone, Mitchell Sims was dangerous. With Ruby beside him, he became even more reckless. Together, they created a storm of revenge, violence, and cruelty that moved from South Carolina to California and ended in Las Vegas. It began with a man who could not accept humiliation. It grew through a relationship built on damage and chaos. And it ended with innocent workers paying the price for a rage that never belonged to them. This was not just a robbery spree. It was a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are not strangers hiding in the dark. Sometimes they are co-workers, managers, customers, people wearing the same uniform. And by the time the world sees what they truly are, someone has already opened the door.